When the universe hands you lemons, make this gorgeous low-carb tarte au citron. One of the best things about the keto diet and low carb is that you can still enjoy desserts so long as you make them the right way. And today on the Low Carb Cook is one of my all-time favourites, tarte au citron. That's lemon tart to you and me, and this is one sweet treat that really packs a punch for your taste buds with its sharpness, and that is something that can often feel missing from low carb. I'm going to show you the super easy way to make the perfect sweet rich short crust pastry and the foolproof way to prepare the lemon filling using a sous vide method. So let's jump right in. So starting with my sweet rich short crust pastry, you're going to need 50 grams of almond flour, 50 grams of vital wheat gluten, 50 grams of lupin flour. Now I always try and use lupin flour in place of something like coconut flour. I'm not keen on the taste of coconut flour. 50 grams of granulated erythritol, half a teaspoon of xanthan gum, a pinch of pink Himalayan salt, 100 grams of cold unsalted butter, and then I'm going to add about 10 ml of white cider vinegar. That's just going to help keep our pastry nice and crisp. I'm also going to add 10 to 15 drops of stevia into the pastry. Now moving on to our lemon filling, we're going to start with 5 large free-range eggs, 4 unwaxed lemons. I've got 50 grams of powdered allulose or erythritol, whatever you can get in your area, and 150 ml of double cream. So we're going to be using several kitchen gadgets for this recipe, but if you don't have either a food processor, a blender or a sous vide, don't worry, you can absolutely still make this, but you're going to have a bit more work on your hands and you'll have to be super careful with temperatures when you're preparing your lemon filling. But more on that bit later. For now, we're starting with our pastry. I have a separate video here on my channel showing you how to make just that element in more detail, so do watch that via the link below if you'd like a slower walkthrough of that stage, as we're going to run through this a bit more rapidly for today's recipe. This pastry, like its savoury counterpart, is a perfect recipe to make in the food processor, and I highly recommend getting one if you plan to do lots of your own cooking and baking. So to get started and make things just a little bit easier, we'll move our filling ingredients out of the way so we're not confusing those. And we're going to start with our pastry really simply by adding all of our dry ingredients into our food processor. So that's our vital wheat gluten, our lupin flour, almond flour, and our granulated erythritol. Now I use granulated erythritol in this recipe because it seems to stop the pastry sagging later on when it goes in for its blind bake. Now I'm just going to let that run for a minute just to grind up that almond flour a little finer because we want a really nice fine pastry texture. Don't forget to add in your xanthan gum and your pink Himalayan salt. There we go. It does help sometimes if you pulse the food processor. You're going to get a much finer consistency pastry from this. Now I can already see that's looking good, so I'm going to start adding in my butter. Try and keep your butter cold, that's quite important. That really helps your pastry. And once that's in, you're going to see that start changing and become much more granular in texture. There, and you can see that really changing into that new form now. So the next thing I'm going to do is add 2 capfuls, that's about 10 ml of apple cider vinegar. Now this smells really strong, it's certainly not a nice sweet smell, but that's going to dissipate in your bake. You won't smell or taste that in the final product. You can really see that coming together. I'm now going to add my 10 to 15 drops of stevia, and I'm really just best guessing that. There. That's coming to a ball. And lastly, I've got around 40 ml of cold water. I'm not going to add all of that straight away. I'm just going to let that go in. I want this to turn into a paste. Really quite wet paste, and there you go, that's turning now. It's great, and while that's blending, I'm just going to grab some cling film. And a spatula. And there we go, that's our pastry made. Now I'm just going to scrape all of that onto my cling film. And you could spend hours mixing this by hand if you really want to, but I don't really want to. I think cooking is great fun, but you can do it the easy way if you prefer. There. Now I'm going to wrap this up in the cling film, and that's going to go into our fridge for about 30 minutes to an hour. And that's going to just absorb all of that moisture, and it's going to relax and firm up. And here's a tip for you. If you want to use this pastry quicker, squash it flat, and that'll let the cold get through it much more quickly. That's going to work really well. So we're going to pop that in the fridge for about 30 minutes, and then we can turn our attention to making our lemon filling using our sous vide method. So onto our lemon filling. Now this is where we need some really quite precise temperature control to make sure that we don't just end up with lemon scrambled eggs. And believe me, before this next kitchen gadget came into my life, that happened to me far too frequently. Now even as a keen amateur home cook and baker, I had never heard of a sous vide until just a few years ago, when I really upped my cooking game after embracing the low carb lifestyle. This little gadget is basically a water heater and circulator that heats this bath of water to a really specific temperature and then just keeps it there, so there is no way you can ruin your food. It's really popular for pre-cooking steaks before searing them in a pan, and that's something we'll be looking at in a future video on the channel. But for today, I'll be using mine to heat my filling mixture to a very precise 40 degrees centigrade before it goes into the pastry case for baking. This will start to cook the mixture through and thicken it without cooking the eggs. So I've already got my sous vide in the water bath, heated to temperature. You could just use a large pan if you don't want to buy one of these. And just to talk about price for a moment, I know a sous vide can be really very expensive, well over £140 in some cases, but I paid around £20 for this one just a few years ago on eBay, so do be prepared to hunt around and you can pick up an absolute bargain. So to put the mixture into the sous vide, I'm just going to be using a traditional Ziploc freezer bag and remove as much of the air as we can. Sous vide actually means in vacuum in French, and really posh folks use a vacuum sealer to put steaks in bags and suck all the air out so they sink nicely to the bottom. But you can just weigh yours down with a couple of large heavy spoons if you need to. So firstly, for our filling, we need to start with our 4 lemons. Before we juice them, we want to grate the rind to get that lovely tangy zest ready for later on. So I'm just using the really fine grater on a standard cheese grater, really, and I'm going to scratch off, minding my fingers. I don't want skin and lemon pie, nobody does. And for me, you can't make a lemon tart that's tangy enough. I really love the flavour you get from this. Do make sure you get unwaxed lemons. You don't want all the rubbish they spray them with and polish them with in the supermarket inside your lemon tart. Straight away, the smell of lemons and that zest is filling the air. It's such a welcome fragrance when you are used to eating sort of high-fat meals all the time. I kind of love the fact that you get 2 uses out of your lemon. Not only are you going to take the juice from it, but also you're getting this wonderful zest from the outside. Now, if your lemons are nicely proportioned, you'll only need 4, maybe 5 if they're a little bit smaller, so you can pick and choose and add to the recipe as you need to. But there you go, that's our lemon zest. So we'll just set that aside, and now I'll take a sharp knife and I'm just going to cut my lemons in half, ready for juicing. There. Now, to get the most out of these lemons, I'm going to use the juicing attachment on my clean food processor. If you don't have one, again, really not a problem. Just use whatever you have to hand to juice them. You can squeeze them with your own hands if you want. This way, I find I get the most. So just pop it in. push down, off. And look at that, that really cleans that lemon out inside. You get everything you want from it. So we'll just carry on and put these through the machine. When you've got 8 or 10 of these to do, this really is a massive time saver again. And I know a lot of people think, oh, I don't want to use a gadget, that means more washing up. But at the end of the day, that's what we cook for. That's part of the process. Last one. There. So I'll just pop that off, leave it to one side. And you can see from that, we've got, pour it into a jug. That has yielded 150 ml, so more than we need, but that's not a problem at all. We can just pop that aside and maybe use it in something else. So I'm going to clear those out of the way. Now, the next thing to do, I'm using my blender attachment on here. So I'm just going to start popping all of this. So we want 100 ml of lemon juice, just judging by trying to leave 50 in the jug. There we go. Next, we're going to crack our 5 large free-range eggs. One of these days I am going to learn. I know I can hear you all shouting at me. I'll learn to crack them on a side, or I'll do it one-handed. Everybody wants to be able to crack an egg one-handed and look like Mr. Cool. I ain't Mr. Cool. But there you go. Right, chuck those in. There we go. Next, we're going to add our 150 ml of double cream. Of course, if you're American, you call that heavy whipping cream. But we're terribly English. We call it double cream. Have it with our scones. It's lovely. I'm going to chuck about 2/3 maybe of this lemon zest in there. And then I'm going to add my allulose. Now, I managed to get hold of some allulose in the UK through an eBay seller. For many people, you're just going to have powdered erythritol, and that's fine. Hopefully, in the very near future, you'll be able to buy allulose easily in the UK. Then I'm going to add 10 to 15 drops of stevia. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you go. And that is going to be blended on top of our food processor. There we go. And with all that in there, we're going to blitz this mixture to blend in the zest and release all of that lemon flavour. Of course, you can always use just a traditional hand blender if you prefer. There we go. That's looking really good. So we're going to transfer this now into our Ziploc bag. Make sure you've got a good Ziploc bag. We don't want any water getting into that mixture. And we don't want the mixture getting out of the bag. That's going to get very messy very quickly if that happens. There we go. So I'm going to try and squeeze as much of that air out of the bag as I can. That's just going to help it sink to the bottom. But inevitably, this is going to float, and that's where you could get some weights if you really need to, which is why I have my 2 very heavy spoons. So we're going to sink this in. Now, I know this bath for this episode really is overkill for doing such a small amount of mixture, but this is what I have available to me. You could just use a large pan. That's sunk down really well. So we're going to leave that in there for about 30 minutes. Now, if you want to use the pan method instead, make a bain-marie with a large pan of water and a glass bowl on top, and just be really careful to stir it continuously and not let that temperature go above 40 degrees centigrade. Otherwise, you really will have scrambled eggs and you'll have to start again. So with our pastry resting in the fridge and our filling sitting in the sous vide, we're going to do the washing up and take a really quick break, and I'll be back with you in just a moment. Welcome back to the Low Carb Cook. Now our pastry has been resting in the fridge for around an hour, and that has really changed in that time. It's absorbed a lot of that moisture now, and it's surprising how much it changes. Now if I try and roll this out at this stage, it will definitely just crack. And I know that with traditional pastry, you don't want to touch it, you don't want to handle it, you want to leave it as cold as possible. But I personally think the best thing to do at this stage is scrunch all this up and remold it, and that's just going to soften it, and that's going to stop it cracking as we roll it out. So I just give that a working, and it's only warming it up slightly, but it's just making it that bit more pliable. Now, I'm using my favorite lupin flour to roll this out. First of all, dust your surface. There we go. Make that into a nice ball. There. And also dust your rolling pin as well. Now I want to keep this quite thin and even across, so I've got a really wide 20-inch rolling pin, and to get my 4mm thickness I'm using these little rubber guides. I have a set of them and they work incredibly well to make sure that you're rolling evenly, and I really don't mind if that's cheating. It's the result that I want at the end of the day. And before we start rolling out our pastry, just turn your oven on to around 140 degrees centigrade. We're going to cook this quite lightly. We don't want to have a really hot oven for this one. And then I'm just going to gently start rolling out. Keep dusting and keep turning. You can see that even for a keto pastry, this is really quite flexible. Now you're very likely to have some of this spare, and that's absolutely fine. This stuff will keep in the fridge if you roll it up in cling film. You can even freeze it and use it again later on. I love how these guides just help me to keep this the right thickness. Again, I'm going to lift, turn, or from there. Go sideways. There, and that is perfectly rolled out. So now I'm going to very carefully lift this up, slide my pan underneath. I'm going to spray my pan with coconut oil. That's just going to help that release when it's cooked. And then gently lift that over. And don't worry if this pastry does crack. That's really not a problem. If it's a bad crack, you can just re-roll it, start again. But we're going to gently lower the sides of this into this tin. If you try and push it down in and stretch it, it definitely will crack, and we're trying to avoid that. So just lift the sides, push it down. If you do get some small tears and cracks, that's fine. You can patch those up. Just pull a piece in from the outside and you can patch that up, no problem at all. Now I'm using a nice little scalloped edged tin just to add a bit of decoration. Again, you can use whatever you have to hand. But I think presenting food nicely and adding a bit of decoration just adds to the experience. We've got just a little crack there, so you see I bring in a piece from the side and I'm just going to add that over, squash it on. Just gently pressing it in will help it stick to the other piece. So there. Now I find, because I've used granulated erythritol in this pastry mixture, when I blind bake this, unlike traditional pastry, it really doesn't tend to sag. It's quite stable in the tin. Now you can, if you want to make sure of that stability, you can pop this back into a fridge for 10-15 minutes just to cool down again and relax. But I really don't find I need to do that. So to clean the top, I'm just going to roll across the top, clear that away. Push that back in. There. Now I'm just going to use a fork to prick holes in the bottom. That's going to release any trapped air that's gotten stuck in there. Yeah, that's ideal. Now we're going to blind bake this first for 10 minutes, then we're going to bring it back out, give it an egg wash inside to seal that before the liquid goes in, and at that point we're ready to put the filling in. So we'll pop this into our oven now, 140 degrees for around 10 minutes to start with. Okay, I'm quickly going to prepare my egg wash, and that is literally just crack an egg into a cup, and then I'll use my fork, just break that up. There we go. And while we're here, we'll just quickly squeeze up the remainder. This is really made enough for 2 tarts, so actually you could get 2 out of that mixture. That's really good going. But again, store it in the fridge, pop it in the freezer, and you've got some ready for next time. So join me back here in just a few seconds, and we'll be doing our egg wash. Okay, so that's been in and blind baking now for its first 10 minutes. Let's pop that out, and we'll give it its egg wash. Now, because we're going to put quite a runny liquid in this eventually, we want to make sure we've sealed all this, not just to stop it running through the holes in the bottom there, but also because we don't want this runny mixture to make this really soggy. So we're going to give it a really quick brush. This is just a beaten up egg, as you saw before. This step will also help to stop your finished tart from cracking on the top surface. Make sure you get the egg down into the little fork holes just to seal those up well. Go around the sides as well. Really, don't be tempted to skip this step. It might seem like a silly and pointless thing to do, but it really does help improve the final tart and can stop all of that liquid running around the bottom of your oven, which, believe me, takes longer to clear up than actually doing this. There. I'm going to pop that back in for just another 5 minutes just to really cook that little bit of egg and seal that up, and then we'll be ready for our filling. And in the meantime, I'm going to show you just the macros for just the pastry base. Okay, so that's our next 5 minutes up. We'll pull that out of the oven and we'll get ready to put our filling in there. Looking good. Now, usually to do this next step, I find it much easier just to pull the tray out of the oven, leave the base there. It's much cleaner. It means you're not slopping things around all over the floor. But for purposes of this video today, we're going to do this here on the worktop. So we're ready to bring this out of our sous vide. There we go. Now, this has been sitting in here plenty of time. Now, while it's still in the bag, it's a good opportunity just to squish it up a bit and give it an extra mix. I don't want to put too much air into it though, if I can help it. So just quickly drain that on a towel, open the bag, and really carefully, we're now going to pour this mixture into our pan. Now, if this was a thicker mixture, I'd be able to tap this to get all those air bubbles out, but not so easy. But I'm going to transfer this now on the tray over to the oven. I'm just lining those trays up there to really gently push that on. There we go. And she's in. Perfect. It's always a relief to see those things safely in the oven. So while that's in there, we can turn off our sous vide and you can have a look at the overall macros. So back again, 20 minutes on, and our tart is perfectly baked, and it's just starting to set in the oven. Now, it's going to finish setting in the fridge later on when it cools down, but for now, there we have one beautiful tart, and we're just going to leave this here to cool right down, and we'll be back again in just a second. couple of hours in the fridge later on, and this has cooled down really perfectly now. So we're just going to dust the top with some powdered erythritol, just to give it that final look. And for a finishing touch, well, you've got to have a slice of lemon. And there it is. This is such a delicious bake, and one you can serve at the swankiest of dinner parties, or just knock it up and keep it in the fridge for when you want a feel-good feast. Either way, it's another awesome recipe that will make you forget that you're even on a diet, and that can only help keep you sane and on track. Now, if you've enjoyed this recipe, share it on your socials, give it a thumbs up, but above all, subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified of new videos from The Low Carb Cook. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Hey, thanks for watching The Low Carb Cook. If you enjoyed this episode, why not watch one of our playlists or this recommended video? Click on the logo below to subscribe. Join us on any of our social pages, or if you'd like to show a bit more love, you can support the channel on buymeacoffee.com using the link below. For even more great stuff, check out the website, thelowcarbcook.com.